Let's go back to one of our top stories now that involves allegations from Amnesty International that Australian officials breached international law in an effort to turn back boats. The Minister for Immigration, Peter Dutton, joins us now from Sydney. Thanks very much for your time, Minister.
Thanks, Paul.
It was quite a strong reaction from you yesterday, talking about that report and in fact saying that Amnesty International tries to attack Border Force and the mobile staff, and it's a disgrace. What do you mean by that?
Well, Paul, I think for a long time plenty of NGOs have had very strong opposition to the government's policy on Operation Sovereign Borders, and I think people have taken every opportunity to attack ultimately what is the success of Operation Sovereign Borders. We've been able to stop drownings at sea, and we've been able to increase the number of people that we take through the refugee and humanitarian program otherwise. But people are ideologically opposed to regional processing centres, even though it's a policy of both Labor and Liberal, and people are opposed to detention. Therefore, people come up from time to time with ways that they can attack that policy, and the government is absolutely resolute in our determination to make sure that we keep the boats stopped, that we can still bring people in record numbers through the humanitarian program otherwise, and to get kids out of detention. They're all priorities for us, but I think some of the approach of some, including Amnesty in their report yesterday, go beyond the pale, and I pointed that out.
What was wrong about their report? What did you take particular offence of within the content of the report?
Well, as I say, I think people have an ideological opposition to regional processing centres, to detention, and that's their right. We live in a democracy. I have no problem with that, but people will use whatever angle they can to try and attack the core of the government's policy, and that's what I think has happened in this case. And I think people who have compiled this report have put it together ultimately with the objective of trying to stop us from our success in Operation Sovereign Borders, and I'm not going to be a party to that.
And do you stand by earlier statements that Australian officials have not handed money over to people who are in charge of those boats as part of the turnback policy?
Well, Paul, I commented in relation to the issue at the time. We provided a submission to the Senate inquiry. I don't have any further comment to make in relation to that matter. The only point that I would make is that our staff operate within the law, within Australian law. We meet our international obligations in terms of treaties and other agreements that we operate under. And the Australian Border Force staff are highly professional. They've been responsible for stopping deaths at sea, and we're not going to allow people to come across the seas in rickety boats paying people smugglers. We prefer to take people in record numbers on a per capita basis. The highest number of refugees are settled permanently in this country each year. That's something we're very proud of, but we're going to conduct our migration policy in an orderly way, and we're not going to allow the people smugglers to recommence ventures as they would seek to do. And that's the position that we've had for a long time.
Ultimately, what is your reason for not directly going to whether or not money changed hands?
Well, as I say, Paul, I commented on it at the time, and we've provided a submission to the Senate inquiry. I just don't intend to raise it again and to give it more oxygen. I think
did you look into it? Was there a comprehensive investigation from the Australian government?
Well, obviously we were aware of the allegations at the time, and in terms of our internal discussions and deliberations, I'm not going to publicly canvass that. My point here is that I think an opportunity has been taken to attack in an ideological way the way in which we have stopped the boats, and we turn back boats where it's safe to do so. And people are opposed to that, including Amnesty, and I respect that. But I think this has just been an opportunity to launch an ideological attack, and I think that's why it needs to be addressed, because the government is not going to be bullied into changing our position of what has been a very significant success of stopping boats and stopping drownings at sea.
Can we move to another matter now, and the woman, the pregnant woman who has now been given medical care, taken off Nauru and given medical care. Are you satisfied that all the medical help was first class in this case? There have been reports overnight that the Immigration Department did not act on several requests from medical staff on Nauru that she be taken to Australia for care earlier.
Well, Paul, all I ask is that instead of reading posts and blogs, people look at the facts in relation to this matter. This is a very sad and a very personal matter for this lady. We have provided significant assistance through the medical staff both on Nauru and here in Australia. Her discussion now is between her doctor, her medical staff, no doubt her legal staff, and I think it's a deeply private matter. The point that I've made is that we provided additional medical assistance over the last week or so to provide support and advice to the lady on Nauru. The advice to us was that she was best brought back to Australia so that she could seek the assistance of mental health services here and also to speak to a doctor about the options in relation to a termination, a decision which is deeply private and for her to make with all of the advice available to her, and that's what we've facilitated. Now, I think if this was an Australian who was alleging that she'd been sexually assaulted, people would want to respect her privacy, and the facts in relation to this matter remain that we have provided significant support, medical assistance. The lady will receive that assistance in Australia, and I think that's where it's best left.
Can I speak more generally about the situation in Nauru? And have you looked at the legalities of the current Royal Commission, which is ongoing into institutional responses to child abuse, looking at allegations of sexual abuse on Nauru? Obviously, this case would be different, but there have been allegations of child abuse as well.
Well, Paul, all I can say is that if there is a request for information or any authority is seeking assistance, the department will provide every assistance. In terms of Nauru, the Regional Processing Centre is operated by the Nauruan government, but the Australian government provides significant financial support. I've said before that we should be very strict in our policy of not allowing people to come to our country who have sought to come here by boat. We take people through the refugee and humanitarian program otherwise. But at the same time, there should be a humane, decent environment for people to be accommodated until they can be returned to their country of origin or a third country. But we've been very clear that people aren't coming to Australia, and I want to see people out of Nauru and out of Manus and back to a better arrangement. But we can't have a situation where we can allow the boats to restart so that the vacancies are refilled by new arrivals. So we have to have a policy where we can support the Nauruan government. We've sent additional federal police up there to provide capacity building, to provide a response, and people that commit offences, as is the case in Australia, should face the full force of the law, and that's nothing that we've resolved from, or anybody could suggest that our approach has been any different from that.
Minister Dutton, that takes me neatly to my next question. Did Tony Abbott show you his speech before he read it out at the Margaret Thatcher lecture?
No, Paul. I think my staff would tell you I'm not a great editor of copy. So Did
he tell you what he was going to say in general terms?
I had a conversation with Tony about a week before he left, and I knew then that he was going to raise the government's success in relation to Operation Sovereign Borders. I didn't see the copy of the speech, but I thought it was a good speech, and I thought in terms of the policy approach, it was the fact that in the last couple of elections, the government went to the election saying, on a very strong platform, saying that we would stop boats, and we were elected on that basis, and that's why Malcolm Turnbull has continued the exact same policy in relation to Operation Sovereign Borders. And as I say, we aren't going to allow these organised criminals, the people smugglers, to get back into business, to send people on rickety boats across high seas. We're going to take our refugees in record numbers through the United Nations humanitarian and refugee program, and through the SHP program here otherwise. So
he made a couple of comments. I'm sorry, Minister, our time is short, but I'll get to this one. Just a couple of quotes. Too much mercy for some necessarily undermines justice for all. No country or continent can open its borders to all comers without fundamentally weakening itself. In recent times, we've been told that the Sovereign Borders operation is about saving lives at sea, and yet that is talking about something quite different. Did you have any thoughts on that and the language that was used, considering the ex-Prime Minister said he was loath to make these comments while he was in top office?
Well, Paul, I just think people who are interested should read the full text of the speech so that they can see any of these comments in context. But the fact is that we don't want to be a party to people drowning at sea. When I speak to the ADF staff and to the naval staff, to Border Force staff, people who are pulling bodies out of the ocean, they please don't go back to those days. We want an orderly process, and we want to afford a new life to people. The 12,000 places that we've offered to those who are displaced from Syria is evidence of the fact that we can run a very successful migration program. We've settled over 825,000 refugees since the Second World War. We welcome people, but we don't want to be party to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people coming across the sea to our country in a way that results in children, women and men dying at sea, or people flouting the law otherwise. We want to bring people in an orderly way, provide them with the settlement services, allow them to start a new life, but we don't do that if we lose control of our borders, and Labor's admitted exactly that over the course of the last few years.
Minister Dutton, we'll leave it there. Thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you.